Ever get that feeling? Like you're drowning in information, you're looking for that one solid idea, but there's just so much out there. And you want the knowledge, but it's like a tangled mess. Well, we're aiming to clear a path right to the most valuable insights. That's what we do here on The Deep Dive. Today, we're taking a deep dive into Eli Goldratt's The Goal, a process of ongoing improvement.
And this isn't just some old business book about manufacturing. It really has powerful ideas for understanding and improving any system. And that's what we want to get to. Pull out those core ideas and make them useful, no matter what you do.
And Goldratt himself was an interesting guy, a physicist turned, well, kind of a rock star in the world of management.
Yeah, he's the one behind the theory of constraints. Earned some pretty impressive titles. Guru to industry, even genius. He really changed the way people thought about running businesses.
He really did. And one of his big things, one of his core beliefs, was this idea of challenging assumptions. He believed that's where the real breakthroughs happen.
Absolutely. He talked about how in factories, a lot of people are uncomfortable with relying so much on, cost accounting efficiencies. That's often the main way things are controlled.
Yeah.
But it doesn't always feel right, does it?
It doesn't. You get that gut feeling like something's off.
Yeah, but very few people actually stop and ask, hey, wait a minute, is this even making sense? That's what Goldratt wanted to break, that we've always done it this way thinking. And, think about it. Have you ever felt that in your own life? At work or even with your personal habits? Like there might be a better way, but you just keep doing things the same old way out of habit.
All the time. And that's exactly what sets the scene for the story in The Goal. We've got Al, the plant manager, and, well, let's just say he's in a bit of a pickle.
Yeah, from the very first page, you get this sense of, well, trouble brewing. And it starts with a seemingly small thing.
Oh, yeah, tell me about it. Bill Peach, the division VP, he parks right in Al's spot, in his fancy red Mercedes, and the rest of the lot's practically empty.
It's not a coincidence. It's a power move, right? It tells you a lot about the dynamics at play here. Peach is in control. And Al's on thin ice.
Definitely. And the tension just explodes when they actually meet. Peach doesn't waste time with small talk. He tells Al straight up that the late Burnside order, which Al probably thought was the biggest issue, is just a symptom of a much larger problem.
Which is?
The plant is losing money. Big time.
Yeah. And then comes the ultimatum, 3 months, turn things around or the plant gets shut down. That's a lot of pressure for one guy to handle.
It's no joke.
Yeah.
And it makes you really wonder, how's he going to pull it off?
Right. Now, Goldratt gives us this really vivid picture of the plant through Al's eyes. He describes it as this almost mystical place, a place where Satans and angels have married to make kind of a gray magic. It's like this strange combination of the everyday routine and the almost miraculous process of, turning raw materials into something useful.
It's a weird kind of poetry, right?
Definitely. What really sticks with you, though, is the sensory detail. The way Goldratt describes it, the warm glow of the sodium iodine lights, the chain link cage overflowing with parts, and that constant sound of the machinery, that ko-chunk. It really pulls you into Al's world. It's complex and a little overwhelming.
Yeah. And Al's first instinct is to try and fix that one big problem, the late order. He's working late, even cancels plans with his wife. You can tell he's feeling the weight of this whole thing.
Oh, absolutely. And inside the plant, it's chaos. Everyone's scrambling to get that order shipped out. Donovan, what does Goldratt call him? Nervous gorilla. Yeah, that's him. He's running around like a madman trying to get everyone moving. But even when they finally managed to ship the order, Al knows it came at a price.
A big price.
Yeah, they had an injury, a machine broke down, all that overtime they had to pay for. Al knows this isn't a sustainable way to work. Yeah, they put out one fire, but is that really efficiency?
Right. And then, right after all that, Al bumps into this guy named Jonah at the airport. O'Hare, I think. Seems completely random, but it turns out to be this, well, pivotal moment.
It's funny how Goldratt does that. He introduces these big ideas not through some big lecture or a fancy report, but through a casual chat at the airport. And Jonah, he doesn't offer simple solutions. He asks these really thought-provoking questions that make Al question everything he thought he knew about business.
And one of the first things Jonah challenges is Al's idea of what it means to be productive. Al's pretty proud of the new robots they installed, thinking that more automation automatically equals more productivity.
Sure, who wouldn't be?
But then Jonah asks him, if these robots are so great, why hasn't your inventory gone down? Why are you still paying the same amount in employee expenses? And why aren't you selling more products?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
If you're not shipping more product out the door, how are you actually more productive? It's a wake-up call for Al. He's been so focused on these internal numbers, these isolated improvements, that he hasn't looked at the bigger picture.
Exactly. And then Jonah asks this question, just tell me in your own words, what does it mean to be productive?
Simple question, but so powerful. He's making Al think about what productivity really means in a practical sense. And then he says something even more profound. Productivity is meaningless unless you know what your goal is. Sounds obvious, right? But think about it. If you don't know where you're going, how can you possibly measure if you're moving in the right direction?
Right. It's like wandering around in the woods with no compass.
Exactly. And this leads Al to this aha moment. He starts thinking, why is Bill Peach so worried? The plant is losing money. And then he remembers, products like the Volkswagen Beetle and the DC-3 airplane. They were both, high quality, efficiently produced, but they didn't make enough money. And that's when it hits him.
What hits him?
The real goal.
Oh, tell me.
The fundamental goal of any business is to make money. It might seem simple, but it's easy to lose sight of when you get bogged down in all the details. And Jonah, he just says, very good, Alex. Very good.
Yes.
It's a small moment, but it's huge.
So if the goal is making money, not just being efficient, how do you even measure that?
Well, Jonah introduces these 3 key measurements. And they're not the typical accounting stuff. First, there's throughput. That's the rate at which the system is making money through sales. It's about the actual cash coming into the business.
Okay, that makes sense. What's next?
Next, you've got inventory. But Jonah defines it differently. He says, it's all the money tied up in things you intend to sell. Raw materials, stuff that's half-made, finished products. It's money that's stuck until you actually make a sale.
I see. So it's not just about how much stuff you have lying around. It's about the money you've invested in that stuff.
Right. And the third measurement, operational expense. That's all the money you spend to turn inventory into throughput. Basically, all the costs of running the business. Salaries, rent, electricity, you name it.
Got it. So throughput's the money coming in, inventory's the money tied up, and operational expense is the money going out.
Exactly. Those 3 are your new tools. And that's how Al needs to start looking at the plant. Not just efficiency, but how are these 3 things working together to actually make money?
It's like a whole new way of seeing things, and it makes you wonder about those robots Al was so proud of. Did they actually help?
Well, on the surface, they seem like a good idea. They boosted efficiency in one specific area. But when you look through the lens of throughput, inventory, and operational expense, they might not have been such a great investment after all.
How so?
Well, they probably didn't increase sales, right? So throughput didn't go up. But they definitely increased inventory, and they added to the operational expense. So maybe, in the end, those robots actually hurt the plant's ability to make money.
It shows you that just focusing on one small part of the system, even if you make it more efficient, doesn't necessarily mean the whole system is going to get better. Sometimes it can even make things worse.
So it's like a chain, right? You're only as strong as your weakest link. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Now, to explain this idea of how everything's connected, Goldratt uses this really clever analogy. Al's trying to understand these concepts, dependent events and statistical fluctuations. And he thinks about his son's scout troop on a hike. It's actually brilliant how he explains it.
I love that part. So how does the scout troop work as an analogy?
Each scout represents a different operation or step in the production process. And they can only move as fast as the slowest person, right? Well, that slowest hiker, Herbie, he becomes the bottleneck. He's the constraint that limits the whole troop's speed. And the variations in each hiker's speed, that's like the statistical fluctuations you see in a real factory. Some days things run a little faster, some days they're a bit slower. And since each scout has to wait for the one in front of him, any delays at the front of the line are going to ripple all the way through the group.
And that's just like a factory where one operation depends on the one before it, and small variations can cause big delays down the line.
Exactly. Now, Al notices that the faster hikers, they keep getting ahead of Herbie and spreading out. That's like the buildup of inventory in the plant.
Yeah.
Work in process that's just sitting there, waiting. The key is to keep the whole troop together. Keep the flow moving smoothly.
So you don't want any gaps in the line.
Right. And this leads Al to another big realization. He uses a simple match game with his kids to show why trying to create a perfectly balanced plan where every single resource is running at full capacity is actually a really bad idea.
That's another one of those counterintuitive things that Goldratt was so good at explaining. It seems like running everything at 100% would be the best, most efficient way to work, but it's not.
It's not at all. Think about it this way. If there's no room for any variation, any little hiccup in the process is going to throw everything off. It's like those dominoes, one little nudge at the beginning can cause a big crash at the end.
And if you're constantly pushing everyone and every machine to their absolute limit, there's no way to absorb those little hiccups. You're just setting yourself up for constant delays and disruptions.
Exactly. So Al realizes that having some slack in the system, some extra capacity in certain areas, is actually a good thing. It gives you the flexibility to handle those inevitable variations and keep the flow moving. Now, all of this leads Al to start thinking about how he can actually put these ideas into practice at the plant. And that's where the theory of constraints really kicks in. Goldratt breaks it down into these 5 focusing steps.
And what are those steps?
Well, first, you have to identify the system's constraint. What's the bottleneck that's holding everything back? Once you've found it, you need to exploit it. Make sure you're getting the absolute most out of it. Then, you subordinate everything else to the constraint. All other processes need to support the bottleneck. 4th step, you elevate the constraint. Find ways to increase its capacity. And finally, if you've done all that and the constraint is broken, meaning it's no longer the bottleneck, you go back to step 1.
So it's a continuous process of improvement, always looking for the next bottleneck.
Right. Now, Al starts to put these steps into action. He prioritizes the parts that need to go through the bottleneck machines. He even brings back some older, less efficient machines to help out. But, of course, not everyone's thrilled about these changes.
There's always resistance to change, right?
Always. The union rep, he's worried about the new procedures. It's understandable. People get comfortable with the way things are. And it's important to remember that anytime you're trying to change a system, you're also dealing with people.
You can't forget the human factor.
Absolutely. Now, Goldratt makes this really powerful point about bottlenecks. He says, an hour lost at a bottleneck is an hour lost for the entire system. But on the other hand, an hour saved at a non-bottleneck is a mirage.
So it's not about trying to make every single part of the system super efficient. It's about focusing on that one crucial constraint.
Exactly. If you save time at a non-bottleneck, it doesn't really matter. That machine or that person is just going to end up sitting idle because they're waiting for the bottleneck to catch up.
So it's like having a traffic jam on the highway. It doesn't matter if you can drive 100 miles an hour if you're stuck behind a line of cars.
Perfect analogy. So Al and his team, they focus all their energy on the bottlenecks they've identified.
Right.
They give those areas priority, make sure there are always people there to keep things running smoothly, and they start to see some positive results.
Things are starting to turn around.
They are. Shipments go up, inventory goes down. Bill Peach even gives Al some positive feedback, which is a big deal because Peach isn't exactly known for handing out compliments.
So they're on the right track.
For now. But then they hit another snag.
What happens?
As they're improving the throughput at the initial bottlenecks, they start to notice new bottlenecks popping up in other areas. It shows how dynamic these systems are. You fix one problem, and another one pops up.
It's like playing whack-a-mole.
Pretty much. It just reinforces how important it is to look at the whole system and understand how all the parts interact.
So how do they deal with these new bottlenecks?
Well, this is where Jonah comes in again with his diagrams. He explains why keeping non-bottleneck resources running at 100% is actually a bad thing. If you do that, they're going to produce more than the bottleneck can handle. And what happens then?
Inventory builds up.
Exactly. You get this pileup of work in progress, which ties up your money and slows everything down.
So counterintuitive.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But it makes sense when you think about it. The non-bottlenecks actually needs some slack, some breathing room to keep the flow moving smoothly.
So it's all about balance.
Absolutely. Now, at this point, they start hinting at a more formal system for managing the flow of materials. Ralph, one of the guys at the plant, has this idea about using data from the bottleneck to predict when to release new materials into the system.
Sounds like the beginning of the drum buffer rope system.
Yeah, it is. They don't explicitly name it yet, but that's what they're moving towards, a way to synchronize the whole plant around the bottleneck. And there's this really important warning that Goldratt throws in here.
What's that?
He cautions against laying off employees, even when it seems like there's excess capacity in some areas. It might seem like a logical cost-cutting measure, but it can backfire big time.
Why is that?
Well, first of all, it demoralizes everyone. The people who work hard to turn things around might be the ones who get let go. It creates this atmosphere of fear and distrust. And in the end, it can hurt the plant's performance even more.
So even though it seems counterintuitive, sometimes keeping some extra capacity, even if it means spending a little more money, can be the best thing for the plant in the long run.
That's Goldratt's argument. Now, to wrap up this part of the story, Al and his team, they managed to land a huge new order from a French company. And this is a big deal because they need more business now that they've worked through their backlog.
But how can they take on more work when they're already struggling to keep up?
Because they've created capacity by focusing on the bottlenecks. They have the resources to handle this new order. And they're willing to accept a lower price because they know that using their spare capacity is better than letting it sit idle.
It's a win-win.
Exactly. So as we wrap up this deep dive into the early parts of the goal, what have we learned? Well, first and foremost, we need to be absolutely clear about the true goal. For most businesses, that's making money. And then we need to measure our progress towards that goal using those 3 key metrics: throughput, inventory, and operational expense.
And those metrics aren't just about numbers, they're about understanding how money is flowing through the entire system.
Right. And the biggest takeaway for me is the importance of bottlenecks. Those constraints are the key to everything. If you want to improve a system, you have to identify and manage the bottlenecks.
And it's not always about pushing harder and faster. Sometimes it's about slowing down, being strategic, and focusing your energy where it matters most.
Absolutely. And the amazing thing about these ideas is that they apply to so much more than just manufacturing. Think about your own work, your personal projects, even your daily routines. What are the bottlenecks? What are the constraints that are holding you back?
It's a powerful question to ask yourself.
It is. And what if the biggest constraint isn't a lack of resources, but something else? Like a belief you have about how things should be done, a sacred cow that you've never questioned.
That's really interesting.
That's what Goldratt makes you think about. And that's just the start. There's so much more in the goal. We've only just scratched the surface. Al and his team, they go on this incredible journey. They develop new ways of thinking, new systems for managing the plant, and ultimately, they not only save the plant, they completely transform it.
Sounds like a story worth reading.
It absolutely is. And it might just change the way you think about your own work and your own goals. So that's it for this deep dive. We hope you found it valuable, and we encourage you to pick up a copy of The Goal and keep exploring these ideas.
And we'll be back next time for another deep dive.